Today we're going to be looking at and installing the Ford Performance lowering springs for 2018 GT Mustangs with Magneride. You're going to want to be checking out the Ford Performance W lowering springs if you have a 2018 GT Mustang with Magneride or a 2015 and newer GT350 with Magneride. These are going to be your go-to lowering springs for Magneride cars. They lower the car 20 millimeters all the way around, which is about 3/4 of an inch. The install will be a 2 out of 3 wrenches in the difficulty meter, and I'll show you how to get these installed on the car now. We're going to start the install in the rear, and because we are going to be lowering the subframe down in order to get the rear springs out, I have a pull jack here, so I'm going to go ahead and get the pull jack in place. Next, we're going to undo the 2 upper shock mount bolts, which are these right here. They're 18 millimeter. Next, we're going to undo the brake line bracket with a 13 millimeter socket. Next, we're actually going to drop the subframe. There are 4 bolts holding the subframe in place. 3 are on the front side of the control arm right here. These 2 13 millimeter right here. Here's a 21 millimeter, and then there's another one on the opposite side of the control arm. You guys want to make sure that you drop one side of the subframe at a time. So we're going to go ahead and back out the 2 13 millimeter bolts now. This right here is your last subframe bolt. That's also a 21 millimeter. So now I'm going to lower my pull jack, and that's going to lower my subframe, and it's going to give me the space I need to just pull the spring out. So now we're just going to slide the spring out of place. All right guys, a couple things to note here. The rear springs in a Magneride car are side specific, so you need to make sure that you're installing the correct side. So you can tell if you have the correct side by looking at the Ford part number. So Ford will give you an L or an R at the end of the part number, so I know I'm installing the left side right now. The other thing is you have to make sure the spring is in the correct orientation. So you want to be able to read the writing at all times, and that's just a general rule of thumb for almost any aftermarket spring. So we're installing the spring like this. It needs to sit like this. We're going to transfer over our isolators now. So you want to make sure that you rotate your isolator so that it's flush against the end of the spring right here. One last thing to note before you put the spring in is that there is an isolator down here in the bottom of your control arm as well. So you want to make sure that once again it's going to be flush up against the end of your spring. So now I'm going to rotate the spring so that it's seated in this isolator in the bottom of the control arm correctly. And now we are seated in the isolator in the bottom of the control arm. So now I'm going to hold the spring so that it will sit correctly up here, and I'm going to use the pull jack to bring the subframe back up. All right, so now we're going to put our subframe bolt in. I am going to start this by hand. All right, same thing here. We're going to make sure our bracket is in the correct orientation. We're going to start this bolt by hand. With the subframe back in place, I'm going to remove my pull jack, lower the car down some, and get those shock bolts back in place. The last thing we're gonna do on this side is get our brake line bracket bolted back down into place. So once again, I'm gonna start this by hand and then tighten down with my impact gun. We're gonna start this side the exact same way. I have my pole jack in place and I'm gonna start by undoing the brake line bracket with a 13mm. After that, I'm gonna move on to the shock bolts up top there. Now we're gonna move on to the 4 subframe bolts, which are in the same location as they were on the other side. With the subframe unbolted, we're now ready to lower the subframe enough so we can get the spring out. So we'll pull our spring. You guys can see that it's free now, and we're just going to wiggle it out. Real quick, taking a look at our factory springs on the table versus the Ford Performance springs, the first thing I'll say is that your front springs, when it comes to a Magneride versus non-Magneride car, are actually going to be the same. They look the same and they fit the same. Your big difference is going to be in the rear of the car. In a Magneride car, you do have side-specific springs. So you'll have a left side spring and a right side spring, and they're not interchangeable. They're actually wound the opposite way of each other. Because of that, you will need specific isolators, but you are going to reuse your factory isolators with the Ford Performance springs here. When it comes to Magneride, you're also not going to get a huge drop from a lowering spring, and that's because Magneride is really all about handling performance as opposed to simply lowering the car. These springs here will lower the car 20mm, which is just about 3/4 of an inch all the way around the car. And I know that that doesn't sound like a huge drop when it comes to the world of lowering springs, but it is going to make a big difference in the 2018 Mustang. And it is going to be enough to actually give you handling performance benefits too. One thing you might notice is a little bit of a harsher ride quality due to the spring rate in the Ford Performance spring. And do keep in mind that you will need an alignment after the install. Alright guys, so same thing as we did on the other side, we are going to slide our isolator into place and just make sure that it's seated in the spring correctly. We're going to check in the lower control arm for the same thing so we know exactly where our spring needs to sit. And from here, we'll slide this into place. All right, so now I have the spring seated perfectly and the isolator down here in the lower control arm. And from here, I'm going to raise the subframe up. With the spring seated and our subframe up close to the body, we're going to grab our bolts. Once again, start them by hand instead of just using my gun. I want to make sure I don't cross thread anything. All right, same thing as the other side. We are going to line our plate up. So at this point, I'm going to pull the pole jack out from under the car. I'll lower the car down some because we still have to get those 2 shock bolts up top there, and then the brake line bracket as well. All right, so we're going to hand thread in our shock bolts. Switch back to 18mm so we can tighten these down with the impact gun. The only thing left to do in the rear at this point is the brake line bracket. Then we'll move up front to do the front springs. So since we will be disconnecting the Magneride sensors in the front, we are going to disconnect the battery, and that's always a good idea. Anytime you're disconnecting your Magneride sensors, just disconnect your battery as well. Now we're going to undo the two 15mm bolts that are on the back of the caliper. Before we pull our caliper off, we're going to undo the brake line bracket bolt right here so we can set our caliper aside. At this point, you can pull your caliper off the rotor and set it aside. At this point, we're going to use a mallet to knock the rotor loose. Some of you might not have to do this, but our rotor's on here, so we're going to use the mallet to knock it loose. All right, so after you give your rotor a couple good whacks, if you need to, just pull it off. All right, now we're going to undo the Magneride sensor, which is right here. Sensor undoes from the bottom. Now we're just going to use the fork here, and we're going to remove our ABS line and the Magneride from this side. We're also going to disconnect the two lines from up here as well. Next, we're going to undo our end link bolt, so we'll need an open-ended 17 to hold the back of it and an 18mm socket for the front. Next, we're going to remove the nut holding the Magneride ride height sensor into place, which is actually right down here, and that's a 13mm. All right, now we're going to undo the two nuts that are on the spindle right here. They're 24mm, and I will say these bolts are pressed in, so I'm not going to hold this side. I'm just going to remove the nuts from this side of the bolt. All right, guys, I am going to use an air hammer to actually get these bolts out of the spindle. If you don't happen to have an air hammer, you can use a sledgehammer, a mini sledgehammer, a hammer, whichever works for you. All right, so now we're just gonna pull our bolts out. If you have a hard time, you can just push your spindle back. At this point, we're gonna lower the car down and then remove the nuts that are holding the top of the strut into place. You have 3 nuts here that are holding your strut into place. They're 15mm. I'm gonna undo 2, and then on the third one, I'm gonna make sure I have a hand on the strut underneath because it's gonna drop out. And now we have our spring and strut. All right, guys, for this next step, you will need a spring compressor. In the shop, we have this nice wall-mounted spring compressor. If you guys don't have something like this, it's not a big deal. You can always go to a local auto parts store and just rent a spring compressor for a day. Either way, you'll need a way to compress the spring so that you can remove the nut on the strut top here. So I'm going to compress my spring down. Basically what you want to see is that your spring is unseated from the bottom of the strut here. Now that the spring is compressed and free from the strut, I'm going to take a 21mm socket, undo the nut on the top of the strut here, and then my strut will be free. So now I'm going to decompress the spring because I need the hat for the top of the strut. All right, so since our new spring is smaller than our factory spring, we actually don't need a spring compressor to get this on the strut. These do seat just like your rear spring, so you're going to want to slide your spring on, make sure that it's seated correctly down bottom here. Grab the top, get your dust boot hooked back into place, grab the top of your strut, make sure everything's lined up and this is centered. Grab the nut, you can actually get it started. So we are gonna tighten this down in easy increments here so it doesn't spin the top of the strut. I'm just gonna take it slow until we get tight. All right, and once you're tight, you're ready to get this back in the car. All right, so now we're back at the car. We have our spring all mounted on the strut and we're good to go. So what I'm gonna do right now is I'm basically lining this up by eye just to make sure that my strut mount bolts are in the correct position. My spindle is pointed outwards. From there, I'm going to raise this back up in the car and get some of these nuts on there. I'm just getting these started for now just to hold my strut and spring into place. All right, so now I'm gonna tighten these up. All right, so at this point we are going to line the spindle up and just try to get our bolts through. So at this point, we are just going to knock these in a little bit more because we want to get the spline seated a little bit before we start with the nut. We've already tightened the top nut, now we're going to tighten the bottom nut. All right, next we're going to get our end link in place. You will need your 17mm open end in order to hold the back so you can tighten the nut down. Next, we're gonna get the ride height sensor back into place. Next, we'll plug in our Magneride sensors and the ABS sensor as well. So we're just going to take these, get them back into place. Then your Magneride sensor wraps around the back of the strut and you'll plug your sensor back in. All right, now we'll get our rotor on. All right, and what we're gonna do is we're just gonna throw a lug nut on the bottom here so our rotor stays lined up so we can get the caliper on. Now we'll grab our caliper and get that in place. We'll put one of the bolts in the back. All right, so we have our top bolt started. Real quick before you tighten anything down, you just want to double check your brake line, make sure it's not kinked, it's still loose, so when we bolt it back down, it'll be in the correct location. So we are going to start our bottom bolt. All right, so we're going to tighten this lower bolt. Tighten our top bolt. All right, the last thing we'll do on this side is get our brake line bracket back into place. All right, so moving on to the other side, the first thing that we're gonna do is the brake line bracket here, and then we'll unbolt the caliper and set that aside. Now we are going to wiggle our caliper off the rotor and set it aside. Just like the other side, now we're gonna pull our rotor. Next, we'll do the sway bar end link, so back to the 17mm open end for the back and the 18mm socket. Now we'll undo the Magneride sensor on this side, just unclips. So now we're gonna switch over to a 13mm so we can grab our ride height sensor right down here. All right, so now we're back to the spindle nuts, so we switched back to our 24mm. Okay, so same thing on this side. We're gonna use the air hammer to knock these bolts out of the spindle for us. All right, now we're gonna remove our spindle bolts. We had the top bolt replaced back in so it would hold the bottom bolt for us. Okay, so now we're gonna undo the 3 nuts that are on the strut tower top. I'm going to undo 2 and leave the 3rd until I can reach under and grab the strut. All right, so same thing as the other side. We're gonna slide this up into place, grab some of our hardware, and get it into place real quick. Now we'll tighten them down with our impact gun. Now we'll get the spindle back up into place and slide our bolts through. All right, next we have our sway bar end link. Same thing as before, 18mm on the front, 17mm open end holding the back. All right, now back to the ride height sensor. All right, now we're gonna plug our sensor lines back in. We'll slide our rotor into place. The last thing we have to do at this point is our brake line bracket. That's gonna wrap things up for this review and install. Keep in mind that you can always check these springs out more online right here at AmericanMuscle.com.